the people are doing. So, human subjects comparison. See, I've been looking forward to this one for a very simple reason. You see, I don't think either of these phones are going to win any awards for human subjects, mainly because, to put it very simply, they have issues. That's honestly the best way to put it. And yes, you'll see all of those issues surface and showcase themselves in a moment. But the fact is this: the Xiaomi, I know for a fact it has a lot of problems, but the Huawei, this is where it gets interesting. You see, sometimes under certain lighting conditions, the Huawei can be near flawless. Other times, at least as per the previous camera comparison I made with the Vivo X200 Ultra, there are certain lighting conditions that can really throw the Huawei off its mark. I'm not really sure why it happens, but it does happen. And I really want to see if that is a consistent issue in this comparison. So let's find out. Alright, so we are starting off simple with our selfies. So basically what we have here is the Huawei with its immediate issue. Like, it's so obvious that it has this magenta tint happening. The Xiaomi selfies, surprisingly enough, look very nice. I have no complaints here. And being very honest here, I think the skin tones in general are just going to be slightly better, slightly more accurate on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra because, of course, the Huawei loves magenta. However, I have noticed that especially when the lighting is challenging, the Huawei's contrast, it's, I think, some of the best that it can have. Like, the way it processes images, it gives you just the right amount of contrast without looking too over processed. Like, yes, there is processing. I can see processing on both phones when it comes to slightly harsh lit conditions. But the way Huawei does it, it is just a touch better as opposed to the Xiaomi 15 Ultra because you get a good amount of contrast, which is literally not happening on the Xiaomi. And weirdly enough, this carries forward with Selfie Portraits. In case you're wondering, no, there wasn't a smudge on the selfie lens. Now, I'm not entirely certain if the Xiaomi always had this issue with Selfie Portraits, but without question, I can tell you that it's suffering quite a lot. And another thing I noticed, the Huawei's Selfie Portraits seem to have much better skin tones as opposed to even the regular selfies, even though the lighting is basically the same. However, and I'm almost certain that you've noticed it already, but the Huawei has a very drastic flaw here. Its edge detection, it's really not that good. Like, compared to the Vivo X200 Ultra, even compared to the Xiaomi 15 Ultra, I can very confidently tell you, the edge detection is probably some of the worst that I've seen, especially with selfie portraits. Regular portraits tend to turn out much better, but the selfie portraits just don't really work all that well. And then for this harshly backlit selfie portrait, I can very easily tell you that I love the contrast that we're getting on the Huawei. I don't like the edge detection issues that we're getting, but I really do like the way the skin is being handled on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra. It looks very natural, slightly more orange than I would personally prefer, but it's definitely looking a lot more nice and a lot more natural. Even though the entirety of the photo is lacking contrast, the skin tones somehow look really nice on the Xiaomi. Now, of course, what about night selfies? Well, it's interesting. So I do think that the Xiaomi is the one with significantly higher detail. There's a lot of smoothing happening on the Huawei, which, may or may not be a bad thing. Like, we also get less grain on the Huawei, so that's nice, I guess. But the skin tones are very interesting that we're getting. I think because of the smoothing, somehow the skin tones also look very off, even though I know the skin color is fine. But the Xiaomi is giving us a very yellowish tone, which I'm not the biggest fan of. Now, arguably, the hardest front camera shot in the comparison. Backlit, night selfie portrait. Yeah, I'm not doing this phones any favors, am I? Oddly enough, the Huawei's edge detection is doing a weirdly nice job, even though it's terribly backlit. I mean, I'm impressed, honestly. It does have a lot of smoothing. The Xiaomi is the one with much higher detail, and overall, I do kind of prefer the Xiaomi's shot because the skin tones look a little bit nicer, the details on my skin are a little bit nicer. However, the contrast, man, the way Huawei nails the contrast, especially when it comes to clothes, and since I wear black clothes, well, let me tell you, black clothes are rendered out so beautifully on the Huawei. Now, of course, getting to the meat of the matter, I can very easily say that I really like how the Huawei looks here. This is in regular daylight conditions. Just bear that in mind. The Xiaomi obviously isn't doing as good a job. Like, yes, I don't mind the contrast. I wish it was a little bit darker in general. Like, it's a little overexposed, especially on my face. But the worst issue that we have on the Xiaomi is that it is just so yellow. Like, that's just horribly unnatural. Now, there is a good amount of magenta on the Huawei as well, but comparatively speaking, just these two images, I would pick the Huawei, easily. But you may have noticed that this is also a Leica authentic image. So if we were to switch over to Leica Vibrant, it does produce a better image, without question. I think somehow the contrast also fixed itself, which is usually the opposite of what generally happens on Leica Vibrant. But don't get your hopes up. This is where the real issues start on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra, because this right here is also a Leica Vibrant image, and you can immediately tell the contrast is terribly off. Like it's got issues, to say the least. The Huawei doing a really good job. Once again, in daylight, it's near perfect. A little bit more magenta than I would personally like, but it's leagues ahead of the Xiaomi, so for the sake of the comparison, it is doing a better job. So here's what I've actually found. With the Xiaomi 15 Ultra, and no, this is not 100% consistent, it is just a tendency on the Xiaomi. It's one of the big issues, inconsistency, on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra. So when you're using 1x, usually Leica Authentic doesn't give you particularly good results, because in general the contrast doesn't balance itself quite as nicely. Using the telephoto cameras, that actually has a much higher tendency of giving you better contrast, better skin tones with Leica Authentic. So you see the issue here, right? Like, we need a middle ground, something that goes in between Leica Authentic and Leica Vibrant. That way, at least when we are trying to take some good human subject photos, we can just go for like a human, something like that, that just tries to balance skin tones and contrast based on human subjects, fine-tuned for human subjects. Now, oddly enough, when it comes to the backlit images that I took, is actually very close on both, because I think it's a different approach, but neither of them is sticking out as a sore thumb, which is a good thing, obviously. So the Huawei has a more processed approach. You can see that it's trying to balance out the contrast for me as a subject and the background as well, along with trying to control the highlights a lot more. The Xiaomi takes a more natural approach. And honestly, you could go with either, whichever one it is that you prefer. Although in this case, I would argue that the more processed approach is giving us a slightly better, more balanced result on the Huawei. The Xiaomi is still more natural. Like, look at the greens. That's about as natural as the colors could get given the situation. Now, of course, for the telephoto cameras, and by telephoto, I mean, of course, the 3.7x on the Huawei, which I think has like the world's best telephoto sensor or something like that. And on the Xiaomi, it's the 4.3x. I'm not even considering the 3x because it's really not worth using. It's a much lower quality sensor, and you're going to be much better off using the 4.3x. That's natural bokeh on both phones. It's tremendous. But of course, what isn't tremendous is my skin tone on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra, which, it makes me look American, and honestly, not exactly something I want. Maybe if I'm trying to immigrate. But other than that, yeah, it's got issues with consistency, without question. But then, moving on over to portraits. Now, portraits actually do turn out really nice on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra, and we also, once again, get two very drastic options on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra. We have Leica Portraits and Master Portraits. Now, Leica Portraits does give you a significant amount of contrast, to say the least. And well, overall, I do like how it looks. In this case, at least, it looks really nice. Definitely better than the very magenta-ridden tone on the Huawei, which has been just such a huge issue. Like, come on, seriously. At this point, it's getting a little out of hand. But if you were to use Master Portraits, which I did, I guess we could confidently say that it looks a little bit more flattering with the lower contrast. You get maybe a little bit more saturation in the skin tones as well. It just, as I mentioned, it looks flattering, but it's definitely not the kind of thing that I would want. But of course, I'm not going to say no to having good options. Whether they are good in terms of consistency, well, that's debatable. To say the very least, it's debatable. I think it's better with portraits, the Xiaomi that is, it's better with portraits than with regular photos because of the way the color science works. Because even with such a backlit shot, it's doing a definitively better job. And we're using Leica Portraits, which is supposed to have much higher contrast, but it's balanced perfectly. Very similar situation here once again. And yes, if you're thinking that I look too dark on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra, well, that's because it's accurate. This was really late during the day, the sun had almost set, so it's actually natural. This is how dark everything looked. The Huawei, of course, has more processing, it has more magenta. I mean, just look at the streets. Now, once again, if you want a more flattering shot, you can have it with the Xiaomi 15 Ultra. That's, I think, a very good thing, and with portraits at least. With regular photos, we had a lot of problems, but with portraits specifically, I do think that the Xiaomi's color science for both Leica Portraits and Authentic so far has been quite nice. Now, moving on, of course, we have the telephoto cameras. This is 3x, which It's not the best sensor on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra, especially against a much higher quality 3.7x. However, I think the colors are doing the Xiaomi a whole lot of favor. God, it's appalling how much magenta we're getting. I think we have had magenta on every single shot on the Huawei. Like this time around, there's not a singular shot that I remember that did not have a huge issue with magenta. Again, a very similar situation here as well, and I gotta say, the 4.3x looks decidedly better than the 3x on the Xiaomi 15 Ultra. And I'm gonna guess that's because of the sensor quality, because it's just a drastically better sensor on the Xiaomi, the 4.3x that is. But on the Huawei, you see, this is 5.6x. This is actually one of the default options on the Huawei when you're trying to take portraits. It doesn't actually give you default 3.7x, it gives you 5.6x. That's a lot of confidence, but yeah, it doesn't look that nice. There's so much smoothing going on. I wish it retained normal detail like the Xiaomi 15 Ultra. I mean, the colors have a lot of magenta in them, at this point, my eyes are adjusting to that damn thing, but smoothing looks very off on the Huawei. Now, of course, I also needed a backlit telephoto portrait. Take a good, hard, long look at the Huawei. Is that not impressive? Like, this is easily the best portrait that Huawei has produced by far. No two ways about it. Honestly, I'm speechless. Like, this is so perfect. Like, this just, damn, that looks good. That's the best way to put it. It looks really nice on the Huawei. Man, I gotta say, I was so pleasantly surprised with the previous one that when I saw this, my heart sank again. Because, well, you have a lot of red on the Huawei. And the Xiaomi is really dark. Like, of course, this is a very difficult situation to shoot, even with night mode. Like, it's backlit, tremendously backlit. But still, like, man, the exposure is good and the contrast is very good on the Huawei. The way it's handling it, chef's kiss. But bloody hell, the magenta and the skin tones just, desaturate the skin tones a little. That's all I ask. Now for the night portrait, this was in much more regular lighting conditions, and I would say that the Huawei is doing a much better job. It's not quite perfect, there's way too much magenta, and all of the warmth is just being removed from the scene because we did have a lot of warm lights, as you can see on the Xiaomi. That is accurate. That's how it looked. But all in all, considering how bad some of the other portraits looked on the Huawei, this is, I think, sadly enough, one of the better ones. Now, of course, telephoto night portrait. I gotta say, it's an interesting approach. On one hand, we have the Xiaomi 15 Ultra, which, well, it does look a lot warmer than what you might have expected. Definitely a little oversaturated in the skin tones, but the warmth, very accurate. Once again, as you saw in the previous scene, it was really warm, the lighting, where I took these shots. And so the warm skin tones are accurate. The oversaturated skin tones, not so much. The contrast, however, huge fan of that. The details, huge fan of that again. The Huawei, really neutralizing all of the warmth and just taking it out. It looks fine. Again, got a bit of magenta, not too much, not excessive, not to the point that I'm gagging, but the smoothing, that's what really just throws everything out. Why do you need to smoothen anything at all when you've got possibly the best telephoto sensor on the planet? It makes no sense now, does it? Tell me I'm wrong. And so that brings us to the end of this comparison. Honestly, I don't think either of these are very good for human subjects in general. Like, there's so many issues. Like, I don't even want to try to recount all of them. There's just so much. The only consistent thing about the Huawei is that it's got a lot of magenta. Every single shot had it. Like, just seriously, it needs an update. Now, here's the thing. Whether or not we got an update, we're gonna see soon enough, because I have another comparison coming up. This time is both the photography and the human subjects comparison, one after the other, with the Vivo X200 Pro. Not the Ultra, the Pro. Why, you ask? Well, it's simple. Because the Vivo X200 Pro is the global release flagship, the real flagship that anyone can realistically buy in most parts of the world. So naturally, the Pro version is, like, it's not the best flagship from Vivo, but it is the accessible flagship. So kind of makes sense, in my honest opinion. So I want to see how both of those phones compare. Like, it's going to be an interesting one. So I'll see you then. Cheers.